Again, good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone, for joining today's webinar. As I mentioned earlier, thank you so much for joining. Like we have been doing in the past, the webinars are focused on helping you guys understand the regulatory requirements, how the regulatory requirements or the QMS requirements are translated. In today's topic, we'll be looking into how regulatory requirements help us in building efficiency in the overall product development, right? With this, quick introduction. My name is Varun. I'm the founder of EasyQ Solutions. Over the last more than 15 years, I've been working with medical device industries where I primarily help them get their regulatory approvals, QMS implementation. The company was primarily started with a vision to kind of help the industry in understanding the requirements in the most simplest way and then getting them implemented, right? Today we have with us Fareen, like how we have been doing in the past, getting some industry expert to help us understand how the requirements are not just understood but also implemented, right? Fareen is someone who has a really good amount of experience in getting products into the market. Hi, Fareen.
Hello, Varun. Thanks for having me over. Congratulations, first of all, on EasyQ. I'm sure it'll help a lot of people. Um, hi, everyone. I'm Fareen. I am a product manager currently. I have been working with hardware as well as software medical devices for with a couple of startups in the last few years. So, yep, here to share the knowledge that I've accumulated so far.
Great. Thank you so much, Fareen. Thank you so much for taking out time from your busy schedule and being part of this session. I'm pretty sure there's a lot that we're going to learn from you today. Okay, with this, before we go ahead with our discussion, product development is one of the most important. Rather, it's the core function for any company, right? It's the function where pretty much everything happens, right? Your entire development, what your company has been formed to do, right, is all basically part of product development, right? And while we talk about this important function, right, it is very important for a medical device company to understand the regulatory requirements and how the the union of regulatory requirements with the overall product development activity takes place, such that when the product goes into the market or when you're going for your regulatory submissions, right, your journey becomes much more easier, right? So that was the whole intent, and that is the whole intent of this discussion, is to help you guys understand what is product development all about, right? And then from there, where where in product development or which phases in product development, right, regulatory comes into the picture, right? With this note, Fareen, I would like to ask you this question, which is a very basic question, right? What is product development? What, according to you, is product development? Can we start from there?
Yes, sure. I think as a product manager, your your key thing to do is product development, right? And this starts right from planning, which includes meeting people to understand what you want to build to ensure that the things goes out into the market and you're continuously doing the changes that are required for your product to be on the top, right? So product development, first stage, of course, planning.
Perfect. So planning, Fareen. What let me ask you this question, right? When we talk about product development, as you rightly said, the first step is planning. And during the planning stage, right, what doesn't work many a times?
Well, I think um, mostly we miss to plan is what doesn't work, right? Well, if we are in the market or if we're trying to build something for the users, what we try to do is uh, we do not respect the regulatory boundary of the product and we build
Hmm.
everything that all the customers ask for. So I think in
Makes
planning it's
sense.
very important to draw our boundaries, which is indications for use for a regulatory product, right?
Very well said. Yep. Very well said. I completely agree with you. I think many at times there is a very weak planning. When I say very weak planning, I don't mean that the company doesn't know what they're making or the product that they're going for. I think when I say very weak planning from a perspective of understanding the regulatory requirements, understanding the regulatory hurdles, the boundaries, as you rightly mentioned, right? I think that is one place, where I have seen a lot of companies missing out, right?
Right.
If we talk about some of the key areas, definitely planning would be the first thing from an overall product development perspective that you need to keep in mind. From planning, I think, if you ask me, the next thing would be requirements, right? You want to ensure you have the right requirements in place. You want to ensure that your requirements have you have taken care of the required, not only the functional requirements but also the non-functional requirements as well, right? So often companies focus only on the functional part of the product, right? They want to make sure that, hey, if you press a button, the light turns green, kind of a thing, right? But what are the regulatory requirements around that is something that is very often missed, Fareen.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's very important to do your planning well, to understand that you have considered all the items that you need to consider, and to incorporate all these into requirements into very clear, concise items. Because this is your input to your development, right? Your development is probably your most expensive and your most time-taking process next. So you want to ensure that you're doing the right thing and you're taking enough time while doing the requirements.
Absolutely. I think Fareen, you hit the nail by the head, kind of thing, when you mention the cost aspect. Because if you don't do your planning correctly, and if it doesn't translate into the right requirements, you are going to end up lacking that efficiency that you want to build, which will eventually hit your overall cost and timelines to the market, right?
Right.
From requirements, the next thing that we look into is verification, right? Fareen, what about verification?
Yes, I think if your requirements are done well, I think you're 60% through with verification, right? Your team knows exactly what needs to be verified, what is the scope of verification in your requirements. If you have written the acceptance criteria, it becomes very easy for your verification team to uh, take it and run with it, right? Like there's no to and fro, there's no discussions, you're not wasting time. It's all going on in a linear fashion. Your thoughts, Varun?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think you again mentioned a very important point: acceptance criteria. Again, most often than not, I've seen that the acceptance criteria are either not written properly or are very vague, right? Which doesn't allow you to understand whether the requirement has been met properly or not, and that leads to a lot of to and fro. That leads to a lot of problems. Again, hitting your overall efficiency, right? So I completely agree with whatever you said, Fareen. The next in line from verification would be validation, right? And as we all know, verification and validation kind of go hand in hand. It's something that you need to complete your verification first, and then you typically go towards your validation, right? And again, in your product development activity, it's the critical state, because until unless you don't finish your validation, you actually cannot even put the product into the market, right? So validation becomes a very important stage. Whatever regulatory markets that you are looking for, right? You want to make sure that you definitely understand the requirements, you understand the standards, you understand the guidances of that market. When you are doing your validation, there are very specific guidances per product, right? That you need to consider, and we'll talk more about it as we go into our discussion. But you need to plan your validations properly, right?
Yes, I agree. I think uh, planning requirements verification, you're going into details, right? You're trying to ensure that you've covered everything. With validation, it's important to zoom out, right? It's important to see your product as a
Absolutely.
whole, and it's important to see that you're fulfilling the correct intended use, right? You've not built something else altogether.
Absolutely. Absolutely, very well said. Lastly, design changes. Fareen, what do you think about design changes? Why is that
Yeah,
important?
well, I mean, once a product is out in the market, right? You've done your regulatory, the product doesn't remain stagnant. It will undergo changes. You will have feedback. You
Mhm.
will have complaints. So very important to again understand how to do a good design change, what to document, how to keep your documents organized. This will just take so much off your plate, right? You're not constantly communicating within the team. You have one document. You have all the documented stuff well written, and people can just go take and run with it.
Fareen, many a times people, right, especially in startup, what I've seen is people think that, the company founders, they think that, hey, if you get your approvals, you are done, right? I mean, you're the
Mm.
king of the world. What I see people are not understanding, right? Or there is a kind of uh, assumption, right? If I can use that word, where this is the notion that, if you get your regulatory approvals, you are done, which is actually not true, right? Getting regulatory approval doesn't mean your story ends over there. It is actually where the sting begins, because now you need to ensure that your regulatory approvals are maintained, right? And that maintenance activity is linked with your design changes, right? As Fareen, you rightly mentioned, your products are not going to be the same, right? The approval that you get for versus what will go, what will be in the market in the next 3 years will definitely be different, right? Will definitely be different due to many reasons, right? And at that point in time, if you're not having good controls, if your design change activity is not in line with the regulatory requirements, right, you are going to be in non-compliance. And when you are in non-compliance, what it means is, you will see your recalls, you will see your 483s, you will see your non-compliances, you will see many other things, right, depending on what the issue is, right? So, please do not ignore the fact that design change is a very important activity, and you need to consider the applicable regulatory requirements for that, for which we'll be, as we move forward, we'll be talking more about it, right? um, and if I take a step further, uh, planning, requirement verification, validation, and design changes, they go hand in hand, right? If you see a lot of activities that we'll be discussing in the further slides, you'll see a kind of overlap between these phases, right? And it is supposed to be, because when one particular phase is completing, it is kind of handing over it to the next stage, and there has to be a good level of overlap so that, that handover is in a smooth way, right? So, there is they go hand in hand. It's a cyclic motion. It's like, your TPLC flow, right? Your total product life cycle development flow, which is basically a circular in nature. You start with planning, you define your requirements, do your testing, verification, validation, then you get your market inputs, which is through your design changes, where the design changes come into the picture. And based on the market input, you again, kind of go in circle, right? So these are five key areas of product development, right, if I can say that. And, let's take one by one each area and see, what are the key things that you need to have looked into regulatory at each phase, right? Let's start with planning. Fareen, how about indications for use at the planning stage? What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I think we shy away from documentation, and it's not a right thing. I understand that's a change in psyche where you're looking at documentation first and doing later, right? As engineers, as product people, we want to do things first and document them later. But if you do your intended use first, right, it draws boundaries for you. You're not stuck in endless discussions with people on should we do this, should we not do this, should we do this feature, should we not do this feature. You have your indication for use, your yes and no list is right there for you in a paragraph. It makes life so easy and efficient for everyone.
Absolutely. I think indications for use in pretty much all the discussion that I have on regulatory, that's the first word, that's the first thing I keep telling everybody. You need to make sure that your indications of use is properly defined, and it has to start at the planning stage, right? And when you talk about your indications of use, there are four key aspects. You need to define the intended use of the intended purpose of the device, the intended environment, patient population, and the user, right? These four things together is going to define your indications for use. And, all other activities that, that follows, right from your labeling, right from your product classification, right? The product classification is also something that is going to be linked to your indications for use, right? Whether your device is going to be class 1, class 2, class 3 in US, or ABCD for IVDR, right, is going to be linked to your indications for use. So if your indications of use itself is not properly defined, what follows is going to, not be in proper alignment with the regulatory requirements, and you will have a lot of hurdles in getting those approvals. Okay. What about geographies for market approvals, right? How many times have I emphasized on that, right? Many a times what happens is, we don't know where to start from, right? And that's where, I think one of the biggest problem begins, right? Because as a founder of the company, I pretty much want to maybe acquire the whole world, right? But what are those you know uh, one or two geographies that I should keep in mind while I'm doing my development activities, right? Fine. What are your thoughts? I'm pretty sure you might have faced this many a times. How do you deal with it?
Right. I think as startups, we want to start small so we can iterate quickly, right? So you'd probably start in the country where you're in. But I think it's good to have like a big aim. You want to be aiming for a CE, or you want to be aiming for an FTA, so that you cover all these smaller countries all together at once rather
Agreed.
than going from one country to the next.
Agreed. I think it's a very well pointed out thing, Fareen. As a founder, right, or as a developer, if you are going to ensure that your product meets the requirement of something like a US or or a Europe, right, where the requirements are very well defined, right, then you give yourself a good chance, to enter the other regulatory regions in a much more easier way, right? Definitely, you'll have to balance out, on your cost side, on your resources side, and things like that, right? But start with your country of origin. If you are in India, think about India. If you are in some other country, think about that country first. That's the easiest, that's the most straightforward. And if you have bigger aims, then one of the mature countries such as USA or Europe or even Japan, would be a good target to keep in mind while you're defining your development activities.
Yes, I think this also helps you write your requirements very well, right? Like I want to
Absolutely.
be
Absolutely.
focusing in, I want to be focusing in, Europe. I want to see the pediatric age for Europe. I want to see what kind of plugs they use in Europe. So all of that stuff is taken care of right at the planning stage.
Very well said. I think that in my personal experience, Farina, I have seen that issue where the example that you gave about the plug and stuff. When we were for one of the product that I was working and we wanted to ship it to Canada, there were certain requirements we had not considered, and we had to basically come back on our drawing boards and kind of try to find solution for it, right? So I can very well relate to what you just mentioned.
Yep, yep.
Okay. Lastly, going to a well-defined risk management plan, ISO 14971. I'm pretty sure many of you all are already aware of the medical device risk management process, right? How often have I seen where the product is already in the market, and there are demos and everything going on, and the companies are going for their regulatory approvals, and they realize, oh, they don't even have a proper risk management plan or risk management documents or the risk management documents in place, right? I think it's very important, for the company to understand the importance of risk management. It is one of the document that has been asked as the top three documents for any regulatory body, right? So from that perspective, risk management becomes very very important from a regulatory perspective, right? That you maintain a risk management plan, risk management file, your compliance to 14971, right? And it is equally important that you want to start this activity at your planning stage itself, right? So when you're doing your product development activity, when you're doing your product planning, right, product strategy, at that point in time, you want to ensure that you also have a good well defined plan in place as well. Thoughts, Fareen?
Yes, no, I completely agree with you. I think a lot of times when you're planning and then, you find your risk at the planning stage, and sometimes you may as well have a mitigation at that point. These mitigation may lead to design changes as well. So when you know of those changes in planning stage only, you can easily add them into requirement rather than going back to the
Absolutely.
drawing board once you're at the end of the SDLC.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Agreed. Okay. With this, we come to an end on the planning phase. It's an important phase, guys. Please make sure that you keep these things in mind, right? And once your planning is done, the next key requirement or the next key phase in the product development activity is where you define your requirements, right? Um, the first and the most important thing, which Farin even touch based in one of the previous slide, is to ensure that your requirements are well defined. When you say well defined, what do you mean? The specifications should be included in your requirements, right? Many a times the requirements are written in the most vague fashion that you can think of, right? It's just a statement which has no actual specification attached to it. And when that happens, right, it is very difficult for you to verify those requirements because you don't know what to test for, right? And the tester will have its own assumptions, and a lot of things then gets driven by assumptions. which will lead to a lot of problems, when you actually go for your regulatory approvals, right? So make sure that you define your requirements with specifications, make sure that it has that clarity, such that you can do your testing in the right way, you can define your acceptance criteria in the right way. Farin?
Yes, no, I completely agree with you.
Okay, going back to market geographical requirements, I think, Farin, you touched based upon this. Your thoughts on what do you mean by market geographical requirements?
Yes, I think, in your planning stage, when you identify these are the countries I want to look at, right? And, this may as well be a wish list. This need not be like the countries that you would want to go in, right? I think if you consider those at the requirement stage, you can ensure that if there's a chance later to go to these countries, you can go to these countries. Like it's mentioned on the slide as well, right? Voltage requirements are different for different countries. Input frequency requirements are different for different countries. So if you take this at the planning stage and then add them to requirements, your life becomes very easy.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think the two very important and two very common examples are what we see on slide is the variations of voltage requirements from country to country, and the frequency requirements from country to country varies. Nowadays, we are also seeing there is a lot of there are a lot of requirements from country to country when you talk about the AI side of things. When you talk about your database data management side of things, right? From the perspective of AI, right? Every country has their own requirements, which are even translating to technical requirements, right? Not just process based and documentation, but also in technical requirements, right? So you want to make sure that you understand these market geography requirements, right, which are linked to the countries, and you define your requirements in the right way. You ensure those are inculcated in your overall requirement specifications, and that would help you in your development process, right? Next, applicable standard guidelines, right? I think for every country, like we know for a fact that US has their own guidances, Europe has their own guidances. Many times what happens is we focus, again, the focus, there is a lot of focus on the functional side of things, right? There might be a lot of focus on some other aspects such as safety and stuff, but we do miss out on certain other key requirements such as labeling, right? FDA has its own 21 CFR part 801 where they have defined the requirements for labeling, right? And these should be considered as part of your requirement definition, right? Cybersecurity, what guidances do you want to look into? We know that NIST is something that is been favored a lot by the FDA, and OWSP is again something which is globally acknowledged, right? So you want to again make sure that you are looking at the right guidances, you are looking at the right standards, the 60601 for safety, right? For your active devices, such that your requirements again are well defined, right? These are the few things which in my experience I've seen companies miss out, and again due to which their development is taking a hit, their testing takes a hit, and they again have to keep spending a lot of time, resource, to ensure that end of the day these things are met for them to get the regulatory approvals, right? So if you keep an eye on these, if you understand your standards and guidelines, and then there are many other standards and guidelines which are specific to a product, right? So there are standards and guidelines specific to ECG, there are standards and guidelines specific to blood glucose system, right? Monitoring system. There are standard and guidelines which are specific to sphygmomanometers, right? So you want to make sure that you understand your product, again tied to your indications of use, and from there drive your applicable standards and guidelines. Farin?
Yes, no, I agree with you. Very well summed up that it's important to take a look at these when you're planning and then to include them in your requirements. Very, very important part of building a efficient product development process.
Okay. Lastly, Farin, so Farin, when we look into defining requirements, right? While we are talking about market requirements, while we are talking about applicable standards and guidelines, right?
Hmm.
What else do we look into?
I didn't quite get your question, Varun. Sorry, you broke in between.
So I said, while we are talking about market and geographical requirements, we are talking about standards and guidelines, right? What are the different? What are the other things that we may that you may recommend us to look into while we are defining our requirements?
Well, I think functional requirements form the basis of your product. So that's absolutely like a no-brainer for any product manager. Apart from that, like Varun, you mentioned performance like safety. requirements like safety and regulatory are important to look into. Other important aspect is performance. I think many a times we forget to include these requirements as well. That, you know, for how many users, what is going to be your user base, how many logged in users, from the point of view of system performance. Other performance could be your tolerances for your devices, right? Then I think the last two very important points are your usability requirements,
Mhm.
right? These need to be taken care of as well. I think this is a must have for FDA. And lastly, I think risk management output, right? Like we discussed in the previous slide, when we're doing our mitigation, it may need to lead to design changes as well, right? Some risk in your product may require a design change. So important to document these as well as requirements that came out of your risk management process.
Absolutely, and I think that again, I would like to point towards a previous slide where we were talking about the importance of starting risk management as early as possible, right? It is because of this reason that if you start your risk management activity as early as possible, it will help you to define your requirements in the right way. It will help you to ensure that you have covered your bases from all the sides, right? Another important thing is on the usability side, right? As we as we move forward, right, and with all the interfaces and AI coming in, right, the whole requirement of usability is becoming very very important, right? The emphasis on usability has been given, specifically been focused on the usability human factor side of things by pretty much every other regulatory bodies, right? US being one of them, but even Europe is very keen on ensuring that you have done your usability studies, you have defined your usability requirements, you have done your your usability failure mode effect analysis, UFME as we say, right? And you have good hold on the overall usability side of things, right? So absolutely, it's important for you to consider these six aspect apart from what we were discussing, and then what we were discussing actually will fall into one of these six areas, right? But ensure that you look into defining your requirements in a 360 manner, like in a holistic way, rather than just being focused on one or two key aspects of your product, right? That wouldn't be the right approach.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you.
Okay.
I think yeah, we shy away from reading these standards and going through this, but I think it helps us in foreseeing the problems that may come, not only from the documentation side, but also from the user side. Standards like usability are a very, very good read for any product manager.
So Fareen, what I would recommend, for the forum is, I understand these standards are, are at times very lengthy. They are very complicated. They are not written in a simple black and white kind of output, right? They are a very gray, and you need to interpret them based on the product that you're developing, right? That's the thing about the standard, right? But at least when you're doing your market research, right? Again, going back to your planning phase, when you're doing your competitive analysis, when you're looking into what your competitors have done, when you're looking at 510K database is one of the very good database that you can look into to at least get some inputs, to understand what are the different things you should consider in your requirements, right? Because those that data will be important, that will serve as a good input. It will help you to carve your research and analysis to few specific things, instead of you going and doing a witch hunt kind of thing, right? So those can be few things that you can consider at your planning stage itself to ensure that you have the right information, right resources to then carve your requirements and few other activities that follow.
That's a very, very good input, Varun. I think doing a predicate analysis has solved so many problems, right? Like how has your how has your competitor addressed this? How have they handled it? It's such an easy way to go forward. Keep moving forward.
Absolutely. Okay, and we also with this move forward, Fareen, and let's talk about verification. Fareen, what is verification?
Well, like we previously said, if your requirements are well defined with an acceptance criteria, your verification is, I think, about the 50-60% solved. So when you're doing a verification, you're essentially ensuring that all your requirements have been developed and implemented correctly.
Absolutely. I think defining verification goes hand in hand with requirements, right? If your requirements are not well defined, you're going to have tough time with your verification activity, right? That said, you want to ensure that your requirements are verified and traceable, and traceability is maintained. Traceability is one of the most important aspect of, from a regulatory perspective, right? That you want to ensure that whatever you have defined, your product definition, your requirements of your product, right, are being verified, and you have proper traceability maintained to as an evidence for the same, right? And that is something, guys, that pretty much, again, all regulatory bodies will look up to, that do you have your traceability matrix maintained within your organization or not, right? Fareen?
Yep, no, I completely agree with you. I think you've pretty much summed it up very well.
Right. Another thing is, while we talk about traceability, it starts from your verification plan, right? You want to ensure that your verification plan is well defined. When we talk about verification plan, I would like to again point out two very important things, right? So first of all, you know very often I keep talking to people, and there is an assumption that verification needs to happen in house only, right? Which is not true. You can take help from third party testing labs. You can take help from, you can outsource your verification if you don't have the resources in house. Like, many companies, they do outsourcing of biocompatibility testing, or they do outsourcing of safety testing, or they do outsourcing of EMI EMC, right? Which is all part of your verification, right? So you know when you are outsourcing, I would like to kind of highlight two things, right? One is, please make sure that the testing that you do in house, or even if you do it outsourcing, there is no testing that gets challenged. That is something that the regulatory bodies will have a lot of questions on, right? It is actually how you have done your testing, right? So please ensure that you document your test setup properly. You have documented your testing environment properly if it is in case of software, and that's part of your verification plan or verification report, wherever you may want to document that, right? And secondly is, remember one thing, that when you get your market approvals, when you talk about your regulatory approvals, right, they are very closely linked to the versions of the hardware and software that you are going to get approval for, right? Definitely it will keep changing as we move forward. We'll talk about that in design changes. But in the initial submission itself, your software version, your hardware versions are going to be something that are going to be linked with all your different test data and test reports, right? So you want to make sure that your verification reports have consistency in defining these versions, right? The hardware and software versions should be well defined in your verification reports, and be consistent in all the documents that you are going to submit for your regulatory approvals, right? So these are two things, again, from a regulatory perspective, that I would like to share with the forum to keep in mind when they're defining their verification plan. Fareen, anything you want to add?
No, no, I think yeah, you're the expert, Varun.
Right. And again, taking the same discussion forward on external testing, right, or using labs for external testing, please ensure that you work with not just the accreditation is the bare minimum that you may want to ask, but try to even go a little bit further and understand the labs condition setup. These labs are putting a lot of scrutiny on third party reports, right? They will not just accept your report just because it is NABL accredited, or the lab was ISO 1777025 certified, or whatever other accreditations they may have, right? You will have to do a little bit more than just asking for an NABL accreditation. You will have to go into their history. You may have to say, whether the lab have experience in supporting, even if responses are coming from the regulatory bodies, to addressing or to answering those responses, right? Those queries rather, right, from the regulatory authorities. Many a time, the lab reports that you submit as part of your regulatory submission will be questioned, right? Will be questioned. They will want to know more details, and at that point in time, if the labs are not equipped to support you, right, then you will have a lot of issues, right? And I have personally seen such issues some of my projects. So it'll be something that I would really want to highlight to the forum. When you are doing your testing, when you're doing your verification activity, when you're working with third party labs, please ensure you do your due diligence in the right way, right? Fareen?
Yep, no, no, I agree. I think I've myself seen such issues crop up. So you may it's a good thing that you're telling people things to be aware of in advance so they can plan for things
Yeah.
accordingly.
And even if I can spend a couple of minutes and try to stretch the discussion towards the software side of things, right? Farin, as you are aware, and you have been working heavily on the whole cybersecurity requirements, right? That has been very important for software, and especially if you are talking about AI, right? Because that's core software, right? Even cybersecurity, when you talk about cybersecurity, companies end up doing things like, when we ask them, okay, have you done your cybersecurity, and the answer is, yeah, we have done our VAPT, right, which is basically vulnerability and penetration testing. Well, guess what, that's not the only thing you're expected to do, right? There is a lot of other activities like your threat modeling, like maintaining cybersecurity plan, like, defining your security architecture, which again is part of your overall verification activity, right? And many at times people think, the founders, the developers think that, oh, you know what, if we have done our VAPD, we are all sorted, right? Unfortunately, that's not the case. And again, this is where you need to be aware of your market. You need to be aware of where you want to, put the device, because all these requirements will be in one or the other guidances that you can refer to and understand, and then try to meet them, right? So please make sure that, your verification plan, your verification activities, your testing, your third party labs, all of this that we just spoke about in the last few minutes, is something that you keep in mind when you reach your verification stage. Fareem?
Yep, no, I agree. I think this goes back to planning, right? You want to ensure that you've considered cybersecurity as part of your plan, and then you've written requirements that are in line with it so that you can verify them.
Actually, no, Farin, while I was talking about verification, something struck me, and I wanted to ask you this question in the previous slide. Is, in your experience, have you ever had a situation where requirements were not well defined, and that led to some problems or things like that? Is there something you can share with the forum?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there have been many, many instances like that. I think as product managers, we want to get the product out as quickly as possible, right? As developers, they want to, as developers or as QA, they want to ensure that, the last 0.5% of the edge cases are covered, right? So this balance is
Yep.
very important. So I remember this time that, we wanted to do, just Android development for one of the apps that we were working on, but well, we missed to specify that in the requirement that, the compatibility is just Android. And we ended up wasting a lot of time and resources by developing it both for web, Android and iOS. So yeah, that was quite a hit. So
Ah,
this is like the simplest of the
oh,
examples.
yes. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, that makes sense. I can share a couple of examples from what I had faced. So there was one, project where I was part of, where we were. So it was basically a display. We had to define specs for the display, and there is some image that comes out, right, and then this it's put on the display, right. So this one doctor, he goes and he buys a 4K 21-inch, very fancy display to see those images, right. And guess what? The display was not compatible with the images that we were creating as an output, right. There was limitation that we couldn't display the image on a 4K display and a 21-inch, both, yeah, 4K, and the resolution as well as the size of the display, right. And it was not defined in our requirements. Now the doctor's like, hey, your requirements does not say that. It didn't say that I'm not supposed to buy a 4K display, right. And I go and I buy this very fancy expensive display, and now your device doesn't work. I don't see the output, and he started, complaining and asking for money and all, right. So that's one example I can share. Another one which I can share is just again emphasizing the importance of indications for use. When we went for our for again another project, when we went for our compliance testing, right, the safety testing and all, the device was actually intended to be used in house as well, right, in the in your house as well, right. And the indication of use didn't actually call that out properly, right. It didn't actually mention the environment of use. And when we went for a compliance testing, the testing agency asked for the details of the device and description of the device, and where all it can be used. And we realized that there is another additional standard, which is 60601-1-11, which gets implemented for any product which is supposed to be used, in your house, or as we say, in a non-controlled environment, right. And we were completely unaware of that, and the requirements that came up from there, we were again not aware of that. The device, we did not consider those requirements, and we were not able to meet some of those requirements, we had to come back to our drawing board, do a lot of redesigning before we can actually go and claim compliance to that standard, right? So these are the couple of examples, along with Farin, what you shared, that I can share with the forum, just to highlight the importance of defining your requirements correctly, and then how it impacts your verification activities, right? I think on that
Right.
note, let's go to our next topic, which is validation. What do you, Farin?
Yeah, validation, I think, very important to do of any product manager. Like we were seeing earlier, or talking about earlier, right? In planning and requirement and verification, we're nailing the details, right? We're going line by line. We're writing things in a manner that are broken down. For validation, it's very important to zoom out and see that your product is meeting your intended or indication for use, right? It's actually designed for users that it is designed for, right? It's not too complex. If you're designing something for doctors, it's not too complex for them. If you're designing something for technician, the language is not very hard. So you need to zoom out and you need to assess all of these things. Your thoughts, Varun?
Absolutely, right. Yeah, absolutely. I think you mentioned, you summed it up pretty well. Nothing more for me to add, but yeah, just make sure that you focus on your indications of use, intent use. When you talk about your validation, there are different ways in which you can, which you can with which you can do your design validation, right? Most often than not, clinical studies is what companies prefer. But please make sure that you focus on your indications of use, and that is another defined in the most appropriate way, because otherwise it will impact your validation, right? And we know validation is the last phase, prior to which, after which rather you can put your device into the market, definitely subject to market approval and all. But if you have not done your validation, then you cannot even ideally release your product into the market, right? And with this, again, we start with well-defined validation plan. And in this case, right, the 2 points that I would like to highlight, right, apart from mentioned, is in line with your indications for use. When I say it is in line with the indication of use, it doesn't mean if you are detecting cancer, you will ensure that your clinical study is to detect cancer. No, it is in line with indication of use means that when you're detecting cancer, what are the different technical characteristics that you're also looking at. You need to ensure that you consider those into your subject selections, right, into your data selection, right, into your subject recruitment, right. If you need to ensure that you have the right subject distribution, right. So indication of use is about all of that. It need to ensure that you have enrolled the right users, right, as you are doing your validation activity, right. So please ensure that indication of use is something that you uh, understand properly. If not, please take help from an expert to who can help you in doing this. Another thing that you need to be very careful is your justification for sample size. This is becoming very, very, very important, especially in the world of AI, right. Your training data set, your testing data set, your overall subjects that you select, what kind of distribution of the subject, how many male, how many female, how many children, right, the age distribution, right, again, in line with your indications for use, right. So very important for you to ensure that these two things are properly taken care of as part of your validation plan. If not, then during your overall regulatory application submission, when the regulatory authorities will look into your file. Farin?
Right. No, I agree. I think, like Varun, you said, it's all a circle, right? You're planning to requirement to verification to validation. So if you miss or you neglect one of those stages, it's all going to come here and become one big thing to handle, especially towards the end of your, when everyone's waiting for your product to launch, you're struggling with issues related to validation, not like a very efficient manner to get your product out.
uh, Absolutely. Another thing, funny, that I would like to share is, in specific countries, and this is again highlighting US, there are certain validation requirements. For example, if you talk about glucose monitoring system, right, and if you talk about glucose monitoring system for prescription use, monitoring system for, let's say, layman use, right, self use, right, the validation
Hmm.
requirements are very different. how your clinical study should be crafted, how your subject selection, I mean, how your sample size should be defined, what are the minimum sample size and things like that, right? That's again, where I would say your regulatory comes to the picture. If you're not aware of these things and you go ahead and work with the hospital and you do your own validation plan without considering these requirements that the regulatory bodies have defined for you, right? Again, being specific in case of US FDA, right? Then what will happen is your validation outcome, your report, will not be in compliance to their requirements, right? And that will again lead to loss of efficiency, because you may have to end up doing all the entire validation study again, right? So please make sure that similarly, I can give you another example. If you are into the development of, let's say, SpO2s, right? Pulse oximeters. There are specific standards for pulse oximeter, which defines the clinical accuracy for which defines the clinic, which tells you to define the clinical accuracy for the product, right? And how to define the clinical accuracy is through a clinical study. In that, they have actually given you the protocol. They have tell you, they have told you what your sample size should be and how the distribution of the sample size should be. If you do not consider these things, then what will happen is during your regulatory submissions, you will be questioned, and you'll have to probably go back and do the whole study again, which will again be a lot of time waste and resource waste, right? Fine. What do you think about defining study protocols?
Yes, I think very important to work with IRBs, right? The regulatory boards of hospitals that have that. It will not only give you good inputs into your clinical study protocol, it will also ensure, like we spoke about accredited third party labs. I would say this is more or less an equivalent to that, right? You get the right input, and they will also be ready to answer any questions that you may have from your regulatory approval agencies.
Absolutely, Farin. I think very well said. It's similar to you giving importance to your third party labs, right? Please ensure that you are working with valid IEC or IRBs, right? And you have proper approvals for your protocols before you can go in and execute your studies. Please also keep in mind the ISO 14155 standard, which talks to you about the process that you need to define and follow for any clinical investigation, which includes human subjects, right? So please make sure that you do that. In fact, if I can take a step forward, and I can also share that many a times, if your clinical studies companies want to publish the data, right? They want to get some publication out of that. It is only possible, you can only do that if your the if your protocols have proper approvals from valid IECs and IRBs, right? So it will also help you towards the publication of your data. So please make sure that your IRBs and IEC approvals are from valid institutes only. Okay, emphasizing on human factors or usability. Fine, why do we talk about this in validation?
Yes, I think usability is very, very important again. Like we spoke about in planning stage and requirement stage, right? You want to ensure that your product works for the people it is intended to work for. You don't want to build a product that your intended user is not able to use. So yes, you take it into account in your planning, you take it into account in your requirement, and then you ensure that while doing validation, you're using 62366 and looking at the factors that can cause risk and ensure that they are being actually mitigated by your users.
Absolutely. I think critical task analysis, usability, human factors, whatever you want to call it, is becoming very, very important. I can share one another example with you guys where the system was an AI, right? It was an AI system. It didn't have any user interface, no software interface, no hardware interface. Still, the system was supposed to be deployed on-prem. Still, the FDA inspector wanted us to do some sort of usability on the overall installation of the system, right? So that's the level of scrutiny and importance that has been given to human factors. So please guys, human factors is something again as part of your planning phase, and ensure that you have done good validation, summative evaluation, as it is called in IEC 62366. I would also recommend you guys to go to US FDA's guidance document on usability as well, right? It gives you a lot of details how your sample size should be, who all you should consider as part of your usability studies. Many a times, Fareen, people come to me and they ask, hey, is clinical study the same as human factors, or can we combine the two? I would always say no, right? right? These are very different things. These are two different aspects. These are two different topics, right? While you can do the human factors in the same hospital or the same lab where you're doing your clinical study, you might take help from the same doctors maybe to do some of these human factor studies. Maybe that is a possibility, but considering them to be the same study, I would caution you against that, right? So please make sure that your design validation versus your usability validation are given priorities on their own respective ways, and don't try to mix it if it is not, that is not something I would recommend. Fareen?
Yep, absolutely agree. I think, like I said previously, very important standard to read for a product manager, and in fact, even for UI UX folks, so that they understand it well, they work with it, so that in the end, you can actually reach your goal of having a product that your users can use without any complaints.
I think, Fareen, as you rightly mentioned, right, the statement that you made, that it is important for a product manager or a product owner to know these standards, right? I think that again, I would like to point towards the first stage, the planning stage, where it is important that the product manager, the product owner, is aware of this, and again, tying to what all we discussed during that slide, and come up with all these product specific standards that he or she needs to comply to over their development cycle, right? So I think very very important point for the product manager to be aware of their standards, right? With that note, let's get into the discussion on design changes. Why is it important? I think we have already spoken about that. What are the few things we need to keep in mind? Let's look into that, right? Document the changes. Wow, why is this important? I mean, wouldn't this be something that all you product managers hate the most?
Yes, absolutely. I think
Fine.
as engineers, product managers, we hate documentation, right? But very important to write down, so that everyone's on the same page. So many times I've seen that, two people have had a discussion, documents are nowhere to be found, and then those discussions go on and on and on, and it is such an inefficient way of making a product.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. I think I can't agree more with you on the note that you need to document your changes. And if you guys think, in the forum, people are thinking that, hey, why documenting changes is in line with regulatory requirement. I would like to kind of, at this stage, link the first point with the second point, that if you don't document your changes, if you don't do your engineering change request or engineering change orders, right, the typical word that's used in the industry properly, you will not have proper evidence to show whether you have done your impact assessment properly or not, right? And impact assessment is the key thing that you need to keep in mind during your design changes, right? It is based on this impact assessment that will decide what regulatory impact it will have, right? What do you need to do if one of these impacts have some significant if one of these field have a significant impact due to your changes that you are making, right? Farin, your thoughts?
No, I agree with you. I think nothing more to add for me.
And based on the impact, right, like just going in the flow, based on the impact that you understand, different regulatory bodies will have different notification requirements. That means, let's say we understand that the design chain leads to some safety impact, and it is in Europe, then you need to immediately notify your notified body. If the same thing happens in the US, right, you might have to do a new 510K or a new PMA or an addendum to the same, right? So based on what change you have made, based on the impact, based on the significance of the change, right, you will needed to, then notify your regulatory body in one way or the other, right? And again, every country has their own guidances as to what kind of changes needs to be notified. So again, please be please ensure that you are aware of those guidances based on the market that you are targeting. Please be aware of the key pointers that are being highlighted in the guidance document. Most of the times they are similar, I can say that, but there are still certain differences that you have to keep in mind, right? So please ensure that you have considered, you have done your analysis properly, your impact assessment has been documented, right, to ensure that you are maintaining your regulatory compliances. Fareen?
Yes, I agree with you. I think going back to planning again, it's important to ensure that you're looking forward. You're seeing that, you know you're making your product in a manner that it is at least there in the market for 1 year without any change, right? You want to plan for that. You want to aim for that. You want to achieve for that, right? If you don't plan well, I think right after your regulatory approval, you may need to do one more release, and that is going to be such a bummer for the whole team that has gone through the process of a regulatory approval.
True, true, and also it tells a lot about the company as well, right? Farin, if you keep getting these regulatory approvals on the same product again and again, and with a very short period of time, and it also tells a lot about the company, that whether they even have a right clarity as to what they're trying to put in the market, right? So
Correct.
it's
Correct.
important from either way that you have a stable product in the market which does not require a lot of to and fro with the regulatory. I mean, where it is needed, right? That you cannot avoid, but you
Yeah.
understand those, you plan appropriately, and then you manage those changes as well.
Yes. Yes. I agree with you.
I think with this, we have come to an end to what we had for the forum today. I really hope this was helpful, and I really hope we were able to add some value. Fareen, thank you so much for for removing time on a Saturday morning and joining us and sharing your thoughts on this topic. I think product development is something which is, as I said, which is the core and which is the most important activity for any medical device manufacturer. And I hope that these pointers that we have got from you about how you can do your product development along with your keeping in mind the regulatory would help the forum would help the industry to get the product out in the market in the more efficient way. Thank you so much, Fareen, for your time.
Thank you.
Fareen.
Thank you, Varun.
Okay. With this, guys, we have come to an end to our forum. If there is anything that you may want to you want to discuss with us, you may want to write to us, you may want to get some clarity, please reach out to us. I would request all of you all to stay connected with us on LinkedIn. Please follow our page. We'll be planning more such webinars. We keep actively posting topics on different post on different topics, which will help you guys to get some more clarity on the overall regulatory aspect. But even beyond that, if you guys have anything that you may want to ask us or you may want to discuss with us, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you so much for your time. You guys have a lovely weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.